The initial development took about 10 years, from 1973 to 1983. We went through 4 iterations of the design, implemented, tested, and changed them until we thought they would work reasonably well, and then turned it on in 1983. So the Internet's been running since then. The World Wide Web arrived around 1991. Nobody noticed, except for a couple of guys at the National Center for Supercomputer Applications, Mark Andreessen and Eric Bina, who saw the text-based browser that Tim Berners-Lee had offered and made a graphical user interface called the Mosaic browser. Everybody noticed because the Internet suddenly became like a magazine with formatted text and imagery and eventually streaming audio and video and the like. So that was a very important development. It also meant that the company that was started to capitalize on that graphical user interface was Netscape Communications. It was formed in 94, went public in 95. The stock went through the roof and the dot boom was on. Fast forward through the 1990s into the early 2000s. The dot bust happens in April of 2000, but the Internet keeps growing because its value is still evident. And then we reach 2007 and the smartphone shows up. None of us knew we needed a smartphone, except for Steve Jobs. And within 11 years, think about it, we have all absorbed this technology and become very dependent on it. That's a very important inflection point, because the smartphone and the Internet reinforced each other. The smartphone made the Internet more accessible because anywhere you could get a signal, you could get onto the Internet. And the Internet made the smartphone more valuable because it had access to all the content of the Internet. So these are what are called mutually reinforcing technologies. Again, a very important thing. The World Wide Web introduced ease of information sharing. A good example of this is Wikipedia, which evolved an interesting collaborative mechanism for dealing with disputes. And so while people had different views of truth, the Wikipedia guys had the agreed material in one part, and then they moved the disputed material to another part, and they let the people who didn't agree with each other battle it out. But at least you could see the area where there was common agreement. So a very powerful example of global information sharing. Social media show up, things like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and so on. What's interesting about those social media and relevant to our discussion tonight is that they have some built-in incentives that produce results that we might not have anticipated. In the case of Twitter, the primary metric that people pay attention to is how many people are following you on the Twitter account. The point that I want to make here is that these social media have a component in them, this feedback incentive loop, that leads to extreme behaviors, extreme statements, extreme videos. The reason for that is quite obvious. The more extreme you are, the more attention you get. Newspapers have known this forever. You've heard the expression, if it bleeds, it leads. And so bad news gets all the attention. In fact, there have been some recent tests showing that bad news propagates through the Internet faster than good news does. So we have this problem that we built in mechanisms in our social networks to produce extremism, and that produces polarization. Now we get to fake content, and here we've got the problem that we can't always tell it's fake. This has led to an increase in misinformation, disinformation on the net, and we are bereft of algorithms to inhibit or to at least distinguish or detect that. The only piece of wetware that I can think of that works is called critical thinking. And you ask yourself, is there any corroborating evidence for the assertion that's being made? Who put this up there, and what motivation might they have had for putting it there? What is it that they're trying to persuade me to believe? Personally, I think every young person, in fact, every person of every age, should learn how to think critically about what they see and hear.